Yes, we are.
Give me 1 second. Okay.
Okay, you're good? All right. Well, thank you all for coming. And this is the Eisenhower Library Comic Fest. And my name is Penny. And we have Victoria and Steve, but mainly we have Trevor Mueller. That's the big draw here. Please remember to go to our website and check out the Artist Alley that is attached to the Comic Fest panel. There's a big panel picture on the website. Go through and check that out. There are about 30 or 40 artists there, and some of them have specials going on just for Comic Fest. And also, if you happen to live in Norwich or Harwood Heights, Atlas Comics up on Harlem Avenue is having a 10% off special until the 13th. And they will also give you 2 free comic book day comic books if you come in. So make sure you mention Comic Fest when you go to Atlas, and you can win something fabulous. Meanwhile, we are going to talk about writing comics with Trevor, and he has been writing comics professionally for over 20 years, specializing in self-publishing, both in print and digital media, and his work has won and been nominated for numerous awards. His projects include the 2-time Harvey Award-nominated series Albert the Alien, an adventure series about the first foreign exchange student from space. They are really cute. If you haven't seen them, you should definitely check them out. He's currently writing 8 original graphic novel series, and he has spoken on a variety of topics, helping aspiring creators learn how to make their own comics. His website is trevormueller.com. I'm sorry, Trevor A. Mueller. I kept sending these emails to Trevor Mueller. I kept getting answers going, no, this is not the right person. So make sure you go to trevoramueller.com. And Trevor, it is all yours. Go ahead.
The joys of the internet, right? Because, somebody else took Trevor Mueller, and so I had to add in my initial to make that happen. The good news is that apparently nobody else had done that. And so Trevor A. Mueller is my website, my Facebook, my Twitter, my YouTube, my Instagram.
Everything.
Find me, follow me, friend me. But hi, I'm Trevor Mueller, and I'm here to talk to you guys today about writing comics. So as Penny said, right, like I've been writing comics for over 20 years professionally. I've been writing comics all my life. I started off with, writing just writing and drawing little on-line pieces of paper. My first comic book series, The Adventures of Stupid Man, about a kid in high school who finds a magical cape that allows him to fly, and he uses that to stop bullies from beating up other kids in his school, right? Like, there's the fun thing about, I think, comics today is that there are less limiting factors than there have ever been before. There's less barriers to kind of making comics than there have ever been before. And with the advent of digital and with the penetration and proliferation of digital comics and people consuming on mobile devices, like a lot of the award-winning comics out there in the digital space either have interactivity, animation, some kind of choose your own adventure. Like there's a lot of different things that you can kind of do with the storytelling. The important part that I want everyone to be able to take away from today's talk is you have to tell that story, right? You've got a story in your head and you are the only one that can tell it. And comics is a way that you can tell that story. It's not necessarily the only way. So we're going to talk a little bit today on a couple of different things. So one, we're going to go through kind of like a little writing 101, just so that we're all kind of on the same page about what builds up an actual story. Two, we're going to talk a little bit about 3-act structure. We're then going to talk about how comics are different, right? How are comics different from any of the other channels that are available to you in the media that are available to you to do writing, narrative prose, interactive through like a video game, film and television and animation, those types of things. And then we'll open it up for Q&A, and we'll leave you guys with a couple of fun activities as well that you can kind of do from home. So just to kind of get started on writing, right? So some of this might sound a little 101 to some more advanced writers that are out there. That's totally fine. I always just have to kind of assume that somebody's coming into these sessions without actually knowing anything about writing or anything about comics. So apologies if any of this seems a little bit redundant, but hopefully you'll find something a little bit unique and interesting in it there as well. So the elements of story, right? So Alan Moore, arguably one of the most famous comic book writers out there, and I think one of the most talented comic book writers of my lifetime, ended up kind of defining the elements of story into 4 categories. So the first category is character. Characters are going to be obviously your main characters, your supporting characters, your protagonists, your antagonists, right? Your good guys and your bad guys, for lack of a better term. And each of those characters kind of has a defined motivation, right? Those characters want something or someone or, you know, an object. Let's call it a MacGuffin, right? Like the MacGuffin is some object that they are after that they want to acquire. For Indiana Jones, it's, you know, the Holy Grail, or it is the Ark of the Covenant, or it is the Crystal Skull if you watched the 4th movie. You know, the object isn't necessarily important. The object is what propels the adventure forward. In romance stories, right, it's they want to hook up with so-and-so, or they want to go on a date with this and this, or whatever, right? Like whatever the characters want something, and then you as the writer kind of have to put obstacles in their path in order to stop them from getting there. And that's how you kind of create this fun whirlwind adventure. So the first element of story is character. The second one is environment. So the environment is where your story takes place. Now, the environment can be a particular scene within your story, or it can be the overarching world in which it takes place. Is it a fantasy story? Is it a science fiction story? Does it take place in a world that is similar to our own but slightly different? Like, say, Batman, right? Like, Batman more or less takes place in today, but, you know, Superman's flying around in Metropolis, so it's a little different. And so, you know, the environment is kind of a critical piece. Now, for the sake of an example that I'm about to give at the end of all 4 of the elements, we'll talk about environment in terms of a particular scene, and you'll start to get my idea here. The third piece is a situation, right? So what is the situation that your characters are in? And this is going to kind of make up all of the little conflicts and scenes throughout your entire story. Because your characters continue to get into situations as they are trying to go on their journey to get whatever the thing is that motivates them, whatever the thing is they're trying to get. And you have to keep putting them into conflict and situations that they have to then get out of. And then the last piece that's on there is time, right? So time is the 4th piece that's kind of on there. And the idea of time is that, yes, it can also be time period, but more so I think what they're trying to get at is that if you have a defined character with a strong motivation in a certain environment in a given situation, then all you have to do is kind of hit play and the story starts to write itself. So let me give you an example. Let's take the environment of a bank. And the situation is that the bank is being robbed. And the character is Spider-Man. How does Spider-Man stop the bank from being robbed? Now, we all have an idea in our heads of who Spider-Man is and how Spider-Man acts. He's a good guy, right? Spider-Man's job and his motivation is to make sure that nobody gets hurt while he's in there. But Spider-Man is playful. Spider-Man is boisterous. Spider-Man is your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. So he's going to be swinging into this bank, stopping these bank robbers by making fun of them and giving quips and shooting webbing. And, you know, it's going to be a fun kind of wacky adventure. That's a good time. If we swap out any one of those 3 elements for something else, the story changes. So let's keep the environment of the bank, and let's keep the situation of the bank being robbed, and let's swap out Spider-Man. Let's replace Spider-Man with Batman. Now, Batman is a much more theatrical kind of character, right? He wants to strike fear into the evildoers. So he's going to be turning off the lights. He's going to be taking out the bad guys one by one and freaking them all out while he's still trying to stop the bank, right? Not a dissimilar motivation to Spider-Man, but a different approach to how he kind of takes it. We can swap out that character for any number of things, right? Swap it out for the Punisher, for Deadpool, for Wolverine. The story is very, very different, even though we still have the same 2 elements of environment and situation. So when you are creating your characters, it's very important to have a defined motivation that drives them and make sure that that motivation stays consistent throughout the length of your story. Yes, they can have character arcs, and yes, they can kind of switch around on there, right? But like once they accomplish the thing that they're after, once they get the thing that they need, your story ends. right? Like that's the end of your story. And whether or not you want to tell more stories with those characters is totally fine. But the point is that they want something, you got to stop them from getting it. And then once they get it, that's the end. So when you look at like things around character identification and character creation, right, there are a couple of different elements that I like to take from the book, and Penny and I have talked about this book at length, Save the Cat, right? And I like these elements of kind of character, where when you're building up a character, it's create a character that you can identify with, right, that has strengths and weaknesses, that has pros and cons, that has thoughts and ideas and dreams that seem real and fleshed out, and that an audience can identify with and ultimately wants to, you know, the second point, learn from, right? Like these characters are going to go on an adventure. They're going to learn things about themselves. They're going to learn things about the world. And you want that character to be interesting and compelling enough for your audience to want to keep going on the journey with them. The third piece on here is have a compelling reason to follow that character, right? As I just kind of said, like having a character you can identify with, learn from, and have compelling reasons to follow them are going to bring your audience along for the journey so that they want to learn more. They want to know how your characters are going to get out of these situations, how they are going to accomplish their goal and acquire the thing that they are after. The fourth element on there is a character that an audience believes deserves to win, right? And so you want a character that you can root for. You'll see a lot of instances, you know, I apologize for any of the younger people that are kind of on this, but I'm going to quote a PG-13 movie, right? The new Mummy movie that came out with Tom Cruise was kind of universally panned across the board. Tom Cruise was not a character that we could root for within that movie. He didn't have any redeeming qualities. And the argument behind the book Save the Cat is that even when you have a roguish-like character, if you give them some moments where they are humanized, where they try to do something nice for somebody else, it allows the audience to identify with them a little bit more, right? Han Solo in Star Wars kind of starts off as this roguish guy who's hanging out in a bar in Mos Eisley, and it's a place where bad people kind of show up. And yeah, he agrees to take Obi-Wan and Luke Skywalker on a trip for money, and then he shoots Guido, depending on which version you're watching, he shoots first, you know, to stop a bounty hunter from getting him. But by the end, like Han's arc there is that he actually identifies with the rebels, and even though he gets paid, he comes back and kind of helps them out and helps Luke save the day. So he undergoes moments, and moments kind of happen throughout that story that allow Han to be a little bit more of a humanized character and a little bit more well-rounded, even though he's snarky and snobby and a scruffy-looking nerf herder. You know, the dude has identifiable and redeemable qualities. And then the last one that Save the Cat kind of puts in there, and this one is true or not, depending on how much you kind of want to define your characters, is make sure that they have stakes that are primal and true for you. Now, when they say things like primal, what they mean is like they want food, shelter, like those types of qualities, right? I think that you can make your character motivations a little bit more compelling than that, right? Like they don't need to be on the edge necessarily, but I find that I do tend to gravitate towards characters who do have a more desperate situation that makes them a little bit more interesting. One of my favorite TV shows of all time, for example, was Firefly. And Firefly is kind of about a group of rogues in space that are essentially trying to rob from the rich and give to themselves and the poor. And they're just trying to make it from job to job, right? Paycheck to paycheck. And so even when you get to the movie Serenity, like they're on their last leg, the ship is falling apart, they can't afford to pay their bills, like, and they've got to go on these jobs even though they don't necessarily agree with what they're trying to do, just to survive. It's where their situation and their environment starts to clash a little bit with their character motivation, because they want to be the good guys, but they got to do bad guy things in order to kind of stay afloat. And so they pick and choose very carefully where they do those bad guys things, because they think the government is bad and therefore they're stealing from the government. I don't need to get into a whole thing. But that's kind of a primal nature, right? They need a roof over their head, they need fuel in their ship, and they need food in their bellies in order to kind of keep going. And so that's really kind of an interesting piece. So the character elements, just to sum up, are having a character you can identify with, that you can learn from, that you have compelling reason to follow, that you believe deserves to win, and that has some kind of primal stakes that make them true and kind of grounded. So that's just a little bit about the elements of story that are on there. Again, a little bit of a writing 101. The last piece that I'll touch base on, and I'll touch on this one really, really briefly, is just the 3-act structure, right? So regardless of whether or not you're writing a comic book, whether or not you're writing, you know, a narrative prose story, a novel, a short story, whatever, you need to have some kind of 3-act structure, right? And the 3-act structure is very simply beginning, middle, and end, right? In Act 1, this is really kind of your setup. And in your setup, you are introducing your characters, you're introducing your world, you're introducing their motivations, you're introducing their climax, and your Act 1 is usually the shortest act within your story, and it ends with what's called an inciting incident. And the inciting incident is when the adventure kind of kicks into high gear, right? This is when the story actually kind of starts. It's when, you know, the world gets shaken, or their views and belief of how things are kind of get perturbed, or, you know, they need to kind of kick it into high gear. Like for Star Wars, I would say the inciting incident there is when Luke comes home and he finds the Empire's kind of wiped out his family. Like, he's already met this Jedi master. He's already aware of the fact that the rebels are in desperate need of help, and Obi-Wan Kenobi is our only hope, right? Like, he's aware of these particular pieces. It's not until he gets home and he finds Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen and the farm are on fire that he's like, oh, I don't really have anything left here. That's kind of my motivational kick in the pants to leave Tatooine finally, because, you know, I spent my weekends just trying to go into town for some power converters with my friends, but, you know, I guess I'll join the rebellion. It's cool. And, you know, like that's kind of the inciting incident that he has there. It's not necessarily the inciting incident for the story, but it's the inciting incident for Luke. And we follow Luke through that hero's journey throughout that first kind of Star Wars story. So Act 1, right, setup. Act 2 is the confrontation, right? So this is where you start to kind of do your rising or your ascending action. This is where your characters are going into crisis. Act 2 tends to be the largest part of your story, and that's where you're putting all those hurdles in between your characters and whatever the thing is that they want, right? Their motivation, their reason for being there. And those continue to just get like more and more climactic as they go. You know, the stakes get raised, the bad guys get smarter and adapt, the heroes get more and more desperate for whatever they're trying to do. I'm framing this up as kind of an adventure story, but you can apply the same logic to, you know, a drama or a romance or a comedy as you want. The point is that the characters get more and more desperate as they continue on their journey towards getting whatever this thing is that they need, and all of that starts to go up to the climax, right? Like the resolution of where they actually get the thing that they need, or have kind of finished the story. And then Act 3 is your resolution, right? And your Act 3 is, you know, your descending action where you're winding down, you're finishing up your story, your character arcs are over, and you just kind of wrap up and denouement, right? Like, it's the end. So Act 1 and 3 tend to be shorter. Act 2 tends to be longer. So just kind of like a really quick 101 on storytelling. I've given a couple of other talks at Eisenhower Public Library about just like writing and story structure before. If you guys have interest in having me back, obviously talk to Penny and Steve and let me know. Happy to actually do in-depth on those. I'm just trying to summarize them real quick for this one. So how comics are different, right? So comics still take all of those elements that we've just kind of talked about, right? It's got all those elements of story, it's got 3-act structure, it's got all of those components. The difference is that comic books are a story told through sequential art, right? Art still told in a sequence. And in that sequence, when you read it in a logical order, it makes sense visually, and it visually tells a story. And then usually, but not always, you complement those visuals with words. Now, there are silent comics that are out there. Gone is a huge example from Japan. It's a famous manga series about a tiny little dinosaur. And that series, I can't remember how many volumes they have. I know that there's at least 4, are completely wordless. And therefore, it becomes very easy to kind of adapt and understand that story. But visual storytelling without words can be very tricky if you're not a strong visual storyteller. So just make sure that you've got a very strong sense of what that visual narrative is that you're doing. But comic books rely on the visual element. And the difference between that and film is that those visual elements come in still images. Right? So you need to sit there and take the key frames, if you're talking about film, right? The key frames of what the actual action is that the characters are taking, the most dramatic moment of what that visual is. And that is the image that you end up kind of showing. Scott McCloud has this fantastic book called Understanding Comics, which you can probably get out of the library. I'm sure they have a copy. And it showcases some of the ways that you can kind of utilize storytelling and visual narrative through still images. One of my favorites actually kind of showcases the control of time. And we'll talk about kind of the way that you are able to kind of control some of these elements in a minute. But the control of time is done both through your panel size as well as your page real estate. So your panel size, let's take an example, a very simple example of a person walking across the room and opening up a door to go out. Now you could do this with like 3 short panels where you show somebody walking, you show somebody's hand on the door, and then you show somebody walking through a door, right? These are quick, snappy kind of images that you end up putting on there. Alternatively, you could also end up taking the just one long horizontal image and having a blank space as the person's walking across the room with them holding the door open as they're about to walk through it. And the reader's imagination fills in the fact that they had to walk across that entire room to get to that point to where they are at to open up that door. They fill in the gaps that are kind of in there. Now that's unique to any other kind of storytelling that exists in the visual spectrum because it's more participatory for the actual reader. For film, things just kind of happen at you, right? Like the animation is happening on screen. You don't need to imagine what's necessarily going in there because you can see it. It's visual. In comic books, because it's a still image, you do actually have to fill in animation that didn't actually happen. So both of these techniques, right, the one where there's 3 panels or the one where there's one long horizontal panel, create a different sense of tone, a different sense of timing and pace, and a different sense of animation, and require a little bit different participation from your readers. And so when you are putting together your stories and your page layouts, you can think about all of those elements, how you want to kind of set the pace. The one with the 3 panels is a little bit more desperate, a little bit more fast. There's more quick cutting in there and that, versus the long horizontal panel where it's a little bit slower, calmer, more, I hesitate to use the word mundane, right? But it's a little bit more of a soothing kind of transition versus the quick cut approach. Both are totally appropriate. You just use them for different things at different times, depending on what you're kind of trying to do with your story. So sequential narrative, right? There are other examples of using sequential narrative through other jobs, right? Like film and animation obviously use storyboards. But the storyboards, right, don't have the exact same real estate issue that comic books do, because they're in a given aspect ratio, and that aspect ratio doesn't necessarily change. But with comic books, because you're not using the full page every single time you're trying to tell the story, real estate on the page matters. And so a larger panel is more important and more impactful than a smaller panel that exists within the page. So when you end up opening up a comic book and you see that they do have a full page spread or a 2-page spread, that's a very important and significant scene that happens within the story because it takes up more page real estate. It takes up more space on the page. And so these are things that you can kind of play with when you are telling your story and trying to do the layouts for the actual comic book. Is how important is the moment that we are seeing here and how much real estate on the page does it need to take up? Same thing ends up applying with any kind of digital aspect, right? It's a little bit different when you're talking about like a webtoon, because webtoons tend to scroll upwards and they kind of take up the full screen anyway. But you can still have smaller panels within those spaces versus some that fill up like the actual and entire screen. So you can still kind of apply similar logic to it. It's just the interaction is a little bit different because it's a little bit more of a physical interaction with the user or with the reader to kind of keep them going through. And also just the real estate's a little bit different because the screen size is a little bit different. So examples of how comics are different continued, right? So again, we kind of talked a little bit about kind of the control of time, the control of the visual piece and the control of the pacing with the 3 panels versus the 1. The last one on there is kind of the control of the narrative, right? And so with comics, they're not really even rules, right? Like there's just some kind of guidelines that exist within modern comics that some people tend to follow. And if you end up picking up a comic from your library or from your local comic book shop, you'll start to notice that some of these kind of exist. So the first one is the page turn, right? So every odd number page within a book tends to have some kind of either question or cliffhanger or something that kind of happens there And then usually either the scene ends or there's some kind of big reveal. And the reason for that is that every odd number page, page 1, page 3, page 5, are the pages that you turn. And your job as the writer and the storyteller of a comic book is to get people to turn that page. Cover artist's job, right, is to get people to pick up the book in the store. Your job as the writer, filling in the content in between, is to get them to actually flip the pages and get to the end. And so you can sit there and have fun, kind of compelling reveals on those pages. One of my favorite comic books that did finish, and I think it has a Netflix series out now, Lock and Key. It's a horror comic about a family that ends up moving into kind of an old relative's house, and it has some supernatural stuff that's going on with keys and mysterious doors and stuff within. And one of my favorite page turns that they have in there is they have a moment where the characters have been separated by a door. And we're on the odd number page. It's a full page spread of them standing in front of this door, trying to bang on it and get in. And then when you turn the page, it's the other side of that door, with the other characters locked on the other side. And it's just a really kind of cool interactive moment, because you can see and experience what that camera motion is like as you're actually physically turning that page with those characters. And you get to see kind of like the fear in their eyes, you know, as you heard them pounding in the previous panel with the sound effects, and then you actually get to see them on the other side. So there's some really fun kind of stuff that you can do with that. My favorite things to do is usually end on some kind of question or cliffhanger or like shocking reveal, and then when you turn the page, you're in a different scene, right? And so suddenly people are like, well, what happened to those characters? What was the answer to that question, right? And it gets them to keep flipping through so that they can get those answers later on within the story. So there are a couple of different ways that you can do this. Again, you don't have to do that. It's not a hard and fast rule. It's just something, it's a technique that I've noticed that a lot of writers tend to use. It's something that I enjoy using myself. Because it kind of creates that cliffhanger within your own story before you get to the cliffhanger at the end of your book, and then it's, you know, tune in for the next issue or buy the next volume. And so you can kind of control some of those narrative pieces because you have, again, the page real estate, the panel count, the panel size, as well as that interaction with the page turn. So there's some really kind of fun and unique pieces that exist within comics that don't really exist through other media. And that's one of the things that I really kind of enjoy about it. From best practices standpoint, you know, just some questions that people tend to kind of ask me about tend to be about things like how many word counts, like how many balloons should we have within a panel, within a page, within all that. Again, there's not like a hard and fast rule around those particular pieces. And then again, depending too, I think, on the audience that you're kind of going for, it kind of varies. So when I've looked at like middle grade graphic novels or some young adult graphic novels, they tend to have larger font sizes and therefore less words per panel and per balloon. Raina Telgemeier, right, like tends to have like kind of those larger font sizes, larger balloons, and less words per page versus like an average issue of Justice League that's out there where they just cram as many kind of words in there, and they're talking while Batman is punching, and I'm like, that's got to be an interesting conversation. I can't even talk to somebody while I'm jogging next to them, like much less when I'm, you know, getting hit in the face and hitting dudes in the face. Not that you should do that. But the point is, right, like they're trying to cram as much story in there with as much dynamic art as they can potentially kind of fit in. And so they tend to have a higher word count, smaller font sizes, so they can kind of fit those pieces in there. I'm not a professional letterer. That's not how I do my thing. I pay other people to kind of letter my books for me so that they can kind of hit those numbers and keep me honest. But, you know, honestly, it's trying to look at like, you know, depending on the size of that panel, like you want to keep, if smaller panels need to have less words, larger panels can have more words, a full page spread can have a lot of words, but you got to think about how those words too are going to kind of flow across that page and what the placement of them is going to be, because in Western culture, right, like we read top down, left to right, and if they can't follow the balloons through your page, they are going to start to get lost. So the panel layout and the balloon layout are very important to kind of flowing the reader's eye through your page so that it kind of follows that left to right, top down as it zigzags throughout your page and your art, and they don't get lost. So there are a couple of layout guides that you can download. If you just Google search like comic book layout, There are a couple of formats that exist that Jack Kirby kind of coined. You can play with these. Again, there's no hard and fast kind of layout to use. And then from a lettering perspective, if you just Google search like lettering guides, there's a whole bunch of free ones that are out there too that you can just look at and either download or read the blog post that they've kind of created that'll talk to you kind of about balloon formation, word count, balloon placement, those types of things. So it's important to kind of look at those pieces because the lettering can definitely ruin a story if it's very difficult for somebody to kind of follow through. I'll give you an example. So Brian Michael Bendis, who I absolutely love, but I'm going to criticize his work a little bit, started off in kind of the indie scene, and now that guy was one of the kind of the founders of kind of modern Marvel comic books. He created like Miles Morales. He created, Siri for Iron Man. He created a lot of like the modern characters within that world and a lot of the stories that kind of exist there. And now he's moved over to DC Comics and he's doing similar for Superman and Batman and those guys. But back when he was doing a lot of the indie books that he was doing, he did books like Powers, which I love. And Powers is a really difficult book to read because of the balloon placement within it. Because sometimes he's going to sit there and have panels that go down along like a single page, and then it goes over to the other page on the adjoining side, right, of your page. But sometimes he just has them go across the median of the book. And you can never really tell when that's supposed to be happening, which can be very, very difficult. So you can have your narrative flow either way. You just need to make sure that it's very clear whether or not somebody needs to stay on one page before they go over to the other page, or whether or not they are crossing over pages before they have to go back over to another page, right? Like, and a lot of the earlier Powers graphic novels tend to not do that very well. And so it is easy to kind of start to get lost. The balloon placement doesn't help. The page layout isn't helping. Like nothing's kind of helping to flow your eye through those pieces. It's only when you realize that, a question being asked in panel 3 doesn't line up to what's happening in panel 4. It's because it's not panel 4, it's panel 7. Right? Because you had to keep going across the top of the page because the conversation continued. So some of these are techniques that you can kind of play with. Some of these are a little bit more advanced techniques, right? But like, just if you are ever kind of crossing over the gutter of your book, make sure that it is very clear to the reader that that's happening, either with like a balloon tail or having like a panel that is in the middle, some kind of visual cue that can kind of help people get with there. Another question that I often kind of get asked at panels and conventions is, I'm a writer, but I can't draw. How do I find an artist? Again, comic books are really, really in a unique space right now. And I would say that even if you don't feel like you can draw, there are comic books that exist out there that are made with stick figures. I've seen comic books get done before where they were drawn on a dry erase board and photographed with their phone and used to kind of create either Instagram-like panels or the pages were just put together in post and then turned into a JPEG and posted up on Tumblr. I've also seen situations where, and I've used situations before where I've made comics using photography. I've dressed up as my characters and I have actually like acted out the scenes, and then I will put that into an art program. Photoshop was the one that I used, and I will add in my balloons and any kind of special effects or pieces like that to it. Don't feel like if you can't draw that you are limited in your ability to tell story. You absolutely can, and I encourage you to play and have fun with it. But if you are looking for an artist, right, there are tons of them that are out there. One of my favorite ways to find artists is going onto Twitter and looking at hashtags. And one of my favorite hashtags is #VisibleWomen. And this is a hashtag where women from all around the world will end up posting all of their art or all of their cool, unique things that they kind of end up doing. I'm always looking at kind of the artists and the sequentials, but sometimes it's background art, sometimes it's character design, sometimes it's music, sometimes it's other things. And #VisibleWomen will get you people from all over the world just to see some of the artwork that they have out there. Now, if they're a professional, they're probably going to ask for money. And if you cannot afford those artists, don't get discouraged, right? Like, there are artists out there that I can't afford to work with because they're getting paid Marvel and DC rates, and I just can't afford to pay those types of pieces. So that's totally fine. That totally makes sense, and that's great. But also your local library, right? There are probably going to be people there that write and draw. And there are clubs there. I know there are clubs there because I've spoken at a couple of them for creating comics. And some people in there can write, some people in there can draw, some people in there can do both. There are ways to kind of do that. But finding people kind of through social media has been the one that I've kind of worked with the best, because artists are constantly posting their artwork and all that, and just having a conversation and a friendship with them, I think has been a really good way to kind of meet people out there. When we are not in COVID, there's also the convention opportunity, right? Because if you're walking around Artist Alley, everyone's got their art and their books and stuff up on display. And that's another good way to kind of meet people and network a little bit there as well. So I just got the notice that we've got about 10 minutes left, and I do want to leave this open for questions. So let's go ahead and start collecting those now. And while those questions are coming in, I will give you guys some exercises. First exercise I want to give you guys, right, for whatever story that you're kind of writing, is to figure out the elements of your story. Who are your characters, right? Who's your compelling protagonist? Who is and what is their motivation? And who is your compelling antagonist and their rival motivation, right? And if you feel so inclined, draw your characters, right? Give them a little sketch. What's kind of unique about them? What's kind of cool visually? Like, do you want to give them a scar? Do you want to give them a tattoo? Do you want to give them like a cool outfit? You know, the environment, right? Where does your story take place? Like larger world kind of stuff. Like, does it take place on an alien planet? Does it take place in a fantasy world? Does it take place in 1960s? Does it take place, 10 years from now? So in the not too distant future. And then what are some of the situations that your characters might get in? You know, what are some of those set pieces, those hurdles that you're going to kind of set up for some of your characters throughout your story? When you're pitching a story to an editor or a publisher or something like that, you usually have to have the entire story kind of like figured out and fleshed out long before that thing ever hits print. You need to have the entire vision for that story in your head. Some writers don't like to do that. Some like to kind of make it up as they go along or have kind of a general guideline, and that's fun if you're doing it as a hobby. But if you're looking to kind of do it professionally, you need to have some of that stuff kind of a little bit more fleshed out. So first exercise I have you guys do is make those elements of story for your story. And then the second thing that I'll have you guys do is figure out your story structure, right? What happens in your beginning? What happens in your middle? What happens in your end? What is your inciting incident? What is the thing that motivates your characters to go and get this thing that they want? And again, with the elements of story, you can figure out kind of the hurdles that they overcome on there. And then the third one on here is finding your creative team, right? Who's going to write it? Who's going to draw it? Do you want it to be in color? Do you want it to be in black and white? How are you going to make this thing? Do you want it to be in print? Do you want it to be digital only? Do you just want to post it up as a webcomic? These are all different options that you have at your disposal and that you can kind of play with. And there's no wrong answer there as to how you want to do it. It's just what do you want to do? And if you are doing it digitally, will you eventually want to collect it in print? That's important, because while screen sizes can change, paper size doesn't normally change when you're printing a book. I found that out the hard way with one of my first webcomics, and I was like, I can never collect this. But the most important exercise that I want you guys to do, right, and the key takeaway that I kind of have from this thing is just to go make comics, right? Like, you guys have a story in your head. You want to tell that story. You're the only one who can tell that story. And if you don't tell it, it's just going to sit up here, right? And in here, it's very easy because it's perfect. You're in what I call the bubble bath of ideas, right? It's warm, it's cozy, it's comfortable. You don't have to do any work, and the story is perfect. Awesome, it's excellent, right? It's going to make you $1 million if you're ever to write that thing. Well, if you don't write that thing, then nobody's ever going to be able to see it. So you got to sit down, you got to do the hard work, and you got to put those fingers on the keyboards, grab that pen and pad of paper and start writing this thing down. And you're going to start to see where the flaws are. You're going to start to hit some roadblocks, things like writer's block and pieces like that. That's okay. That's just part of the process. And the more you write, the more you do it, the more you try to tell stories, the more you'll be able to create techniques to overcome any of those hurdles that exist. Finding an environment in which to write is one of my most critical pieces, because I got two little ones underfoot and they tend to be very distracting, and distractions take away from my being able to write. And so I need to find that right environment for me to do it. So my key takeaway from this thing, right, is go make comics. There's no wrong way to do it. There are techniques that you can kind of follow, which I've gone through over the last 30 or so minutes, but there's no wrong way to do it. Just go do it. and you're going to learn along the way. You're going to have fun along the way. And even if you don't finish that one project, you're going to get inspiration and something to move on to the next one. So just go and make some comics. With that said, let's ask them some questions.
There we go. I don't have anything in the chat, but I have a question. And this question is, so when you're laying out your comic, because you draw your comic, you lay out the panels on the page the way you want them to be. You lay out your word bubbles before you send it off with your script to someone to do your lettering. Is that basically how you do it? Or am I got that wrong?
Not always. So depending on the artist that I work with, sometimes they like to do the layouts. I will usually include direction in my script just because I've created a habit of doing this. I worked with an artist early on that was like, layouts were an area where he struggled. And he was like, any direction that you can give me there would be helpful. And so I could do that one of two ways. I would include like the direction in the script. So I'd say like page 1, panel 1, horizontal panel across the top of the page. Right? And boom, like you get the idea of the horizontal panel. And then I would just do that with all the other panels that were kind of on the page. But I always included a note in there where it was just, you know, this is how I kind of see it in my head, but that doesn't mean it's going to look good once it's on the paper, right? Like, so if you think that there's something else that we can or should do that makes the story stronger, then let's do it. Now, I have other artists that I've worked with that get very insulted when I try to give them direction on layout. And then they tend to like sit there and be like, don't do that. Like it's gonna mess up my process. And so I do like to kind of give them the freedom to do what they want. So it varies artist to artist. And in the cases where I have actually drawn out the layouts, I have sometimes put the characters in there, usually little stick figures.
Yeah.
And then just where balloons go, just so I make sure that there's enough space within those. But again, these are hard and rough sketches, and usually I've got to go back in to my script after the art's done and adjust my script anyway, because I tend to be very wordy, and you can only fit so many words in a panel on a page and still show like a picture.
So someone wants to know, what do you do if you are writing a comic but your story is too short? And
Make it a
what
short
is
story.
the most challenging aspect about writing comics in your experience?
Sure. If your story is too short, make it a short story. One of my first stories that I ended up telling was a 5-page short story called Junkyard Chase. It's about a robot chasing a dog through a junkyard, kind of like a Wile E. Coyote cartoon, right? There's no wrong length for a story. Like typical comic book issues tend to be 20 to 32 pages, somewhere's in there. Most of them tend to be like 20 pages. When you're printing a book, you have to have it in a multiple of 4, because when you print an actual book, right, like this cover image is page 1, but front and back, right, is 2 pages, and then on the inside there's also a front cover, an inside cover, and a back cover. So it's 4 pages per one printed page that gets stapled in the middle. So you tend to kind of make them in multiples of 4. If your story can't be in multiples of 4, then I just throw in like, you know, an extra page or 2 of character designs or my script or a thank you note or something to the reader. But don't feel like length is important. Like you don't have to do a magnum opus kind of epic 200-page graphic novel. In fact, I encourage you to start short with your first stories that you're working on, because you have a higher tendency to finish them. They're a little less daunting than that 200-page graphic novel. So yeah, if your story is too short, do a short story. Your second question on here, what was the most challenging aspect with writing comics in my experience?
I have a couple of others too, so.
Sure. So most challenging aspect for me, right, was just trying to figure out like, what's the most compelling image within a particular scene, especially if it's like a talking scene, right? How can I make this talking scene more dramatic? How can I make it more interesting? How can I make it more visually compelling? And it's always trying to work with the artist to figure out camera angle. We call them camera angles, right? There's no camera, but it's the kind of the camera angle. Do we want a bird's eye looking down? Do we want a worm's eye looking up? Do we just want it to be flat? Do we want over the shoulder shot, not over the shoulder shot, right? Like, how can we kind of make that fun and interesting and dramatic? And honestly, like, you can look at film and other comic books out there as well. One of the things I like to do is take a video game and put my character up against a wall and then start playing with the camera to see how it clips. Like, because that can be fun too. just to say, like, can I get this to be an interesting angle or an interesting kind of way? So play with it, right? Like, there's no wrong way to do it. But for me, it's always, how do I make, what would otherwise just be a conversation between two characters? How do I make that visually interesting and compelling? And that's one of my biggest challenges.
Okay, two really quick ones. This is first a thank you, and then have you ever drawn?
Yes, I used to draw a lot, and I'd say professionally, the last thing that I drew was a webcomic that I had that has kind of a naughty title. I will abbreviate it. It was called A Hole, and so it was a slice of life kind of book, and it was talking heads, kind of like a gag strip that you would end up seeing in a newspaper or something. And that's the one where I actually started to play and experiment, because as I wanted to tell more adventure comics, like that's what I really like to kind of tell, I wasn't able to draw the adventure elements that I wanted to put in there. So what I started to do instead was use photography. And because the main character looked like me, I was like, oh, I can have this cool thing where I'm like hanging off the side of a swing set, and then I'll crop out the swing set and it'll look like I'm falling off a cliff. Like, so you can like do fun stuff like that within it. So yes, I used to draw, and now I primarily work with other artists from around the world on the graphic novels that I'm doing. And again, I like too that they bring like a unique creative flair to my projects. Like, they are the visual component of the story that we're trying to tell, and we are working together as partners to kind of tell this story. Like, my writing only does so much there, right? But if you can't see it and it doesn't translate well visually, then the story is not as good. But likewise, you can take a crummy story with a great artist and it can get that much better. And I've had elements of that happen as well in my time.
And last question is, how do you make your bad guys bad but not evil?
Ooh, that's a good one.
It's a really good one.
One of my favorite examples of a bad guy who's bad but not evil is Lex Luthor. And Lex Luthor has certain motivations within certain versions of Superman where he's not an evil, maniacal, crazy bad guy. My favorite versions of Lex Luthor is where he legitimately thinks that Superman is a threat to our planet, and Superman has too much power and he needs to be put in check, right? And honestly, Batman has started to take a similar kind of approach within a lot of the comics, where he has like a kryptonite ring that he hangs out with in his utility belt all the time. Because what happens when Superman gets hit with red kryptonite? Or what happens when Superman gets his mind possessed by poison ivy, or controlled by Brainiac? Like, how do you kind of stop a powerhouse like Superman? You're not necessarily being a bad guy there, right? But you are thinking that there are situations in which that character can be dangerous and needs to kind of be stopped. But another thing too is with the way that I kind of write my bad guys is I tend to write them as selfish. I like to actually have my villains have the same motivation as my main characters, but their reasons for doing it are selfish, right? Like, so if Indiana Jones wants to get the Ark because he believes it belongs in a museum, and the bad guys want to get the Ark because they think it'll give them eternal power and help them win World War II, right? Like, these are two very different reasons for doing the exact same thing. This one is evil, and this one is not, right? Like, so there are ways that you can kind of sit there and adjust motivations within characters to make them bad guys, right? They're antagonists at that point, but not necessarily evil, just misguided. And it can also end up being that maybe their arc within the story is they learn from their ways that they were wrong. They had an interesting kind of reverse of that within the Black Panther movie, where the bad guy, Killmonger, in that movie actually has the right motivation. Black Panther's the one that's like, Wakanda needs to stay hidden, Wakanda doesn't need to be out in the world, and Killmonger's like, no, we need to be out there. But Killmonger wants them to be out there and also like disrupting the rest of the world. His motivations are based on revenge, because he feels like he's been slighted and wronged. And T'Challa ends up taking that and saying, no, we need to be out there and we need to be using our resources to help the world. We need to be influencing, we need to be coercing and getting people to work together. And that was really kind of an interesting situation. And I believe it's unique within the entire MCU, where the villain was right, just the reason they were doing it was wrong, right? Or the way they were doing it was wrong. And so that's another way that you can kind of do.
Okay, I have one comment. I have to go because we have someone else, another panel coming up, and this was wonderful, Trevor. Thank you. But Maria says my favorite quote was someone asked Lee Marvin why he played so many bad guys, and he responded, "I just play a guy trying to get through the day. He doesn't believe he's bad." So that's often, I think, true with villains too. They don't think they're doing the wrong thing. But
Nobody
Trevor,
thinks they're a bad guy, right?
no,
Like
no, right?
you are like the character. Like no character sits there and goes, "Man, I did a good job of like eliminating all those good guys today." Like Cobra Commander doesn't go to bed and sit there and be like, "Those cursed GI Joes." Like no, like you sit there and you look at yourself as either a hero or a victim of your own story, right? And so that's kind of an interesting way to think about it. Like the one note kind of mustache twirling villains aren't very interesting to me. Lex Luthor that knows that he's a bad guy isn't interesting. Like Lex Luthor doesn't go to bed and be like, "I stopped Superman today. That was great." Lex Luthor sits there and goes, "You know what? I raised profit margins by 20% in Q4 and also helped prepare for the inevitable destruction of Metropolis." So
good for me. Yay
yeah.
me.
I deserve a good couple hours sleep.
Thank you so much. This was great. We really appreciate you coming, Trevor. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And
Thank
I
you,
think
guys.
Chris is going to close us off because we got somebody else coming up at 1:45. So thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.